إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستهديه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا وحبيبنا وقائدنا ومعلمنا محمدا عبد الله ورسوله صلى الله تعالى عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. أما بعد. All praise is due to Allah. We praise Him as He should be praised. We seek His guidance, we seek His forgiveness, and we seek refuge in Allah from the evil within ourselves and the evil of our actions. Whomsoever Allah guides, there is no one to lead astray, and whomsoever Allah leads astray, there is no one to guide him. I bear witness there is no one worthy of worship except Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is His servant and His messenger. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, upon his family, his companions, and all those who follow them until the last day. O you who believe, revere Allah as you should be revered, and do not die except in a state of Islam. Beloved brothers and sisters in Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, فَبِمَا رَحْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ لِنْتَ لَهُمْ وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَظًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ فَاعْفُ عَنْهُمْ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ لَهُمْ وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ فَإِذَا عَزَمْتَ فَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُتَوَكِّلِينَ. Allah tells us in describing the Prophet ﷺ, but at the same time, Allah is informing for us a process. He says, it is out of Allah's mercy that you, O Prophet, have been lenient with them. Had you been cruel or hard-hearted, they would have dispersed or abandoned you. So pardon them, ask Allah's forgiveness for them, and consult with them in matters that you are going to be doing. Consult with them in conducting matters. Once you make a decision, place your trust in Allah, for surely Allah loves those who trust in Him. A few weeks ago, I had spoken about one of the matters that we need to pay attention to in terms of in our households. When it comes to the times that we're in and the circumstances that we're in, it's easy for tensions to arise, and sometimes that there'll become conflict between members of the household. And so we spoke a few weeks ago on conflict resolution. And so today I want to continue in this series of how it is that we're able to manage our affairs in the home. And what I want to focus on today is the decision-making process. Because a lot of times what happens is that when people within a household, and especially between spouses, husbands and wives, that they don't have a process in place, then tensions can arise and conflicts can ensue. And so we've spoken about the Islamic aspect in terms of conflict resolution based on the prophetic model. And today what we want to do is we want to look at the Islamic process of making decisions. Because this is something that is important in anything that we end up conducting in our affairs at home. And the verse that I had recited gives us an idea and a sense of what it is that is needed in order to be able to take decisions in the best of possible ways. There are 4 steps, if you want to call them that. 4 processes or steps that are part of the decision-making process. The first one is istishara. This is consultation. Now when you have any decision that you need to make, it's important to be able to consult with one another, or to consult those people who have experience or who have knowledge about the matter that you have a decision to make. And this is part of our faith. It's mentioned in the Quran in different places, including in this verse. وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ, is to consult with them in this matter, right? And so when we're consulting, what are we doing? We're going to be weighing the pros and the cons of any sort of decision that we're going to take. We're going to weigh the harms and the benefits. And that with the focus, especially in the household, and I really want to focus in terms of the household because this is a lot of times where we can apply these matters. But when we're talking about the household, the idea here is that we're looking to weigh the pros and cons for what's in the best interest of the family unit. It's for everyone. It's not about the husband versus the wife in terms of who gets their word in terms of making the decision or whatnot. It shouldn't be about that. But rather it's about bringing a sense of well-being to the whole family. The previous khutbah, when I spoke about conflict resolution, we talked about how you treat the relationship between a husband and a wife that you're a single team. You're on the same team. You're not opposing one another. You're not enemies to each other, and you're not opposing each other. But rather you're on the same team, and so you have to look at what's in the best interest for everyone in the family. And so what's going to bring about that sense of maslahah, that sense of benefit, that sense of well-being for everyone. And that's one of the points of shura. That's one of the points of consultation. Why are you doing this? Is so that you engage the people who are going to be impacted, and especially those who are seen as being the caretakers and are responsible in the household, right? And so the idea of preventing harm, dar' al-mafasid, actually takes precedence over the acquiring of benefits, which is known as jalb al-masalih. And this is based on a principle in Islam, a fiqhi principle, that dar' al-mafasid awla min jalb al-masalih, or dar' al-mafasid muqaddim ala jalb al-masalih. That preventing harm has more precedence than attaining benefits. Now what does this mean? It means that if you're weighing the pros and cons, there are more cons, that the harms outweigh the benefits, then you should leave the matter completely. You don't do it. If the harms are equal to the benefits, then you can have a discussion in terms of what it is that you want to do, and that if you feel that there might be some benefit that will come out of it, then you can go in that direction. If the benefits outweigh the harm, then that's okay. You can decide to take the benefit. But the idea here is that we want to avoid harm. And that takes precedence over acquiring or attaining benefit. And part of this is to be able to listen to one another's perspective. Part of this has to do with being able to listen to one another's perspectives. Because sometimes you might have a perspective that the other party might not have. And they might not see it from the same way, and vice versa. You might not be seeing things as your spouse might, for example, in this regard. Now, when you're making these decisions, it's important to distinguish between three things. What are known as darura, haja, and takmidiyah. The affair or the matter that you're talking about, is it a necessity, a darura? Is it something that is absolutely needed, meaning that you can't live without it? Or is the thing that you're talking about a haja, which is something that is considered as a need? It is not a necessity, but is a need, which means that if you have it, then it makes things easier. If you don't have it, it makes things difficult, but you can still live without it. That's a haja. But then you have the takmidiyah, which are the luxuries. These are the things that really, that it won't make too much of a difference if they're present, but if they are, then they enhance the life in one form or another. So all of these things need to be taken into consideration in that process of consultation. Then the next step is istikhara. And this is imperative. This is something that is very important in terms of seeking the khair from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a matter that you want to do. And this is something that it brings a sense of comfort. The process itself of asking Allah for the khair brings a sense of comfort into your life, in the sense that we're seeking Allah's guidance. And that's what istikhara means. It means you're seeking the khair from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you look at the dua of istikhara, it's very powerful and very telling in terms of this process of turning to Allah and asking Him to guide us. Because ultimately Allah knows and we don't. فَإِنَّكَ تَعْلَمُ وَلَا أَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتَ عَلَّامُ الْغُيُوبِ. You know and I don't know, and you are the knower of the unseen. And so if there's something that I don't know if there's going to be benefit or harm if I end up taking this route, then I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide me and to show me. And this is something that is done for all affairs. Not just for the big decisions, right? Not just for the major decisions. That if I'm going to buy a house or buy a car, or if somebody is looking to get married. It's not only for these matters. The Prophet ﷺ used to teach istikhara for all matters. And this is based in a hadith that عن جابر ibn Abdullah رضي الله عنه قال كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يعلمنا الاستخارة في الأمور كما يعلمنا السورة من القرآن. That the Prophet ﷺ, and this is in Sahih Bukhari, the Prophet ﷺ would teach us, this is Jabir ibn Abdullah saying this, the Prophet ﷺ would teach us the istikhara as he would teach us surahs of the Quran. Meaning, how often did the revelation come, and how often did the Prophet ﷺ teach the Sahaba verses and surahs of the Quran? And so as he would teach them, just as often as he would teach them surahs of the Quran, he would encourage them and teach them, pray istikhara, do the istikhara, seek the khair, seek the good from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now the istikhara, when a person prays it doesn't necessarily mean that a person has to see a dream, for example, to get the answer for their istikhara. This is a common misconception, that the form of the answer of the istikhara should be in the form of a dream. But that's not true. It can come in the form of a dream, but it's not necessary. And there aren't any hadith to indicate for a person to wait for that sign of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the form of a dream in order to proceed with an istikhara. It's possible, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it is exclusively related to seeing a dream. The idea with the istikhara is you pray it and then you go for what it is that you were praying for. If it's facilitated, that's the khair. If it's not, that's the khair. But the idea is the process of you turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and asking Him for the khair. And believing with 100% certainty, that's what Allah will give you. Why? Because Allah is not going to give you anything other than the khair if you ask for it. But what's upon us is we take the proper means. And so that's why the istikhara and the istishara, the consultation and the istikhara, they go hand in hand. And they can be done in either order. And they can be repeated. It's not something that is, that this has to be done and then this one, or it can only be done once. You'll find that, you can do the istikhara first and then the istishara, or the istishara and then the istikhara. They go hand in hand, and so they can be done one after the other. But then the third part of this process is having that sense of determination and will where you make the decision. This is irada. And so when you make the decision, this means that, okay, we've talked about it, we've consulted, we've prayed our istikhara, and we feel, okay, this is the best direction for us to go, and then you make that decision and you go in that direction. And so this requires a sense of strong will and determination. At the same time, it's azima. There's a sense of azima, which means that you should go in the direction of executing this decision, right? And so once you've done the previous two steps, and you've made a decision, follow through with it. And the reason why is because we don't want to end up going through the process of the istishara, and then the istikhara, but then when the time comes to make that decision, you make a decision, then somebody pulls out. Somebody backs out of it. Why? Because what that does is that, one, it wastes efforts in terms of the istishara, but it also is to help establish a sense of trust between the individual. Because if you come to an agreement about doing something after the istikhara and istishara, and you make a decision, then it's important to follow through with that decision. Otherwise, there's a sense of mistrust that can develop. That, oh, well, we agreed to do this, but then you change your mind. Why is that? Right? And at the same time, it can lead to, or it can indicate a lack of conviction. Sometimes it can mean a sense of fear or anxiety about the consequences. We understand any decision that we make will have consequences to it. That's life. And we take responsibility for our decisions and the consequences. But that's why we do those first two steps. Right? That we don't rush into things. We don't make decisions on the fly, on the spot. Now, if it's something that's related to life and death, if it's an emergency of something of that sort, somebody is being harmed, or there's some sort of abuse that's taking place, then no, you take the steps right away to be able to stop that abuse or to deal with the emergency, right? So if there's it's a 911 call, you don't do istishara for, do I call 911 or not? It's an emergency. You take that step. If that is somebody's life is in danger, or that there's life and death that's being talked about here, then it doesn't. Those are exceptions. But we're talking about when a person is going to make a sort of decision that requires consultation and contemplation. That you have to think about these things and whatnot. And so we understand every decision has its consequences, and we have to be prepared to deal with the consequences. But the idea is once you make the decision, you move forward with it. An example of this from the seerah is when we look at the Prophet ﷺ asking the Sahaba before the Battle of Uhud, shall they leave the city of Medina in terms of going to Uhud and to face the mushrikeen there or not? And so when the Prophet ﷺ, he was moving, he was going with his army, and then he stopped at a place, it's known as Masjid al-Dara or Masjid al-Shaykhain, and he consulted with his companions to say, okay, this is it, we're going to be, this is the time where we have to make that decision. And so then he consulted with the companions, and they said to him, and they encouraged the Prophet ﷺ, we'll go out, we'll fight against the mushrikeen and whatnot. And so then the Prophet ﷺ, he then turned and he went back in and he placed on his armor of coat. Right? While he was placing his armor, then the companions, they had second thoughts, and they said to themselves, we feel that we might have compelled the Prophet ﷺ to make this decision to go to the outskirts of Medina and fight the mushrikeen at Uhud. And so then when the Prophet ﷺ came back out to them and he was dressed in his armor, they said to him, Ya Rasulullah, we felt that we may have compelled you in terms of this decision, that maybe this was something that you did not want. We want you to go back and make the decision on your own. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said something that is very important for us to understand. He said that once a prophet puts on his coat of armor, then he is not going to take it off until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides between him and the other. Meaning that you made a decision, you got to stick to that decision. He consulted, you said you want to go out, he accepted it, he made that decision, there's azima in it, there's a sense of resolve. He went out, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was not going to turn back. Even if the Sahaba decided, they said they wanted, to let him to make the decision all over again, or to change their mind, or whatever, the Prophet ﷺ, there's a process here. And he continued with that, and he made the decision. Right? And so there's that sense of azima. Not following through can lead to missed opportunities as well as wasted resources. But the idea is that if an agreement has been made, and one person doesn't follow through, it can lead to mistrust. So the idea here is, you come together, you have consultation, you pray your istikhara, you make a decision, and then you follow through with that decision. But understand, in the verse that was recited at the very beginning, the first thing that's mentioned in the verse is, it's the rahmah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فَبِمَا رَحْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ لِنْتَ لَهُمْ. So when we make these decisions and we go through this process, there's that basis of rahmah. There's that basis of compassion, of mercy. It's not about forcing a decision onto another or controlling someone else's behavior or intimidating them to make a decision in one way or another. La. The basis of this is that it's out of compassion and concern and love, out of mercy. That's what the basis of this is. Why? Because if you're hard-hearted, if you're gruff, if you have this sense of harshness within your heart or cruelty, then you're going to be pushing people away from you, including in your own household. You will push people away from you. And so the basis of this process, of this decision-making process, at the basis of it, at the foundation of it, is the sense of rahmah, of care, of nurturing. We want what is best for everyone, and you work towards that. And even if you differ or you disagree in terms of certain aspects, you talk through it. Yeah, just as we talked about in the previous khutbah in terms of conflict resolution. But this is how you end up being able to attain something that at the end will be in the benefit for everyone. But then the last step is then you place your trust in Allah. It's tawakkul. So you have istishara, istikhara, irada, and then tawakkul. Place your reliance and your trust on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the final step. And these are all indicated in the verse that was mentioned. فَاعْفُ عَنْهُمْ وَاسْتَغْفِرْ وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. There's the istishara. وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. فَإِذَا عَزَمْتَ فَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. There's the irada, and that you make a decision. If you decide, then you have a sense of azima, and then the last step, فَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. فَإِذَا عَزَمْتَ فَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. When you make your decision, then place your trust in Allah. Allah loves those who place their trust in Him. But the idea here is that point comes at the end. It's not at the beginning. You have to take the steps to get there, right? Because if you don't take the proper means, and then you just say, okay, I'm going to place my trust in Allah, this is not tawakkul, this is tawakkul, which is a false type of reliance, in the sense that you're trying to rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without taking the steps and the means that Allah has guided you to, right? You have to take the steps and the means that Allah has guided you to. Take the proper means, and then you place your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But taking those proper means comes before. And that's what tawakkul means, is taking the prior steps is essential in order for a decision to be successful in a marital context. And so this is something that, when we place our trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's after we take the means and go in that direction. Imam al-Qushayri, in his tafsir, he says the real meaning of reliance or tawakkul is witnessing the divine preordination, the taqdeer of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the relief of the hearts from the turbulence of the self, or of self-direction, which is tadbir. So when a person places their trust in Allah, they have the sense of self-quieting, the relief of the heart, but it's after the person takes the right steps. And at the end of the day, there's a sense of understanding, taqdeer. This is something that is ordained by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If there's something that's meant to happen to us, then it will happen, but we just take the right steps. And everything that happens is ordained by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so then he continues, Imam al-Qushayri, and he says, for Allah loves those who rely on Him. He causes them to taste the coolness of His sufficiency in order to remove from them every fatigue and hardship. And He repays everyone with what they deserve, so He enriches some people for relying only on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by His gift. So this is the essence of tawakkul. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to implement this process in order for us to be able to achieve and attain that which is khair for us, for our deen, for our dunya, for our akhirah, and that this is something that we continue to strive in order to be able to achieve it. Right? It's not a one-off, but this is a process that we should follow in terms of the istikhara, the istishara, the irada, and then the tawakkul. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله العظيم لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين من كل ذنب فاستغفر إنه هو الغفور. الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة والتم التسليم على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. I'll conclude with a brief example from the seerah again, in terms of when the Prophet ﷺ had decisions to make, he would actually consult with his wife. And one of the major decisions that he had to make was in the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. That when the Prophet ﷺ made the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, the Sahaba, the thousands of Sahaba that were there were going to Mecca, and that they were about to enter into Mecca, but then they were stopped by the mushrikeen, and the Prophet ﷺ then made the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. Part of that treaty was that they would return to Medina. They would not complete their Umrah that year. And so then the Prophet ﷺ, he commanded the Sahaba that in their ihram to release their ihram, to slaughter their animals and to cut their hair. And the Sahaba, they didn't move. They didn't do anything because they were in shock. They were supposed to go to Mecca and now they were so close and it had been so long and they had their hearts longing and yearning and desiring, and so they couldn't believe what was happening. And so then the Prophet ﷺ, he sees this, they didn't listen to what he said. And so he goes back into his tent. Who does he ask? He asks and consults his wife, Salama radiallahu anha. And so this is a major matter, and the Prophet ﷺ consulted with her. And he said that I'm concerned for my people, that they're disobeying their Prophet, they'll be destroyed. And what did she say to him? She said to him, go and you do it. When you actually do it and you set the example and they see you with their eyes that you are doing it, you shave your head and then you slaughter your animal, they will vie and compete with one another to follow in your actions. And so the Prophet ﷺ took her advice. He went out, he cut his hair, he slaughtered his animal, and the Sahaba, indeed, they all followed him in that. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So this just show you that even in these major affairs, the Prophet ﷺ would consult with his wife. And so this is to be able to bring that sense of stability within the homes and a sense of mutual compassion and concern for one another. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات المسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات إنك يا ربنا سميع قريب مجيب الدعوات ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين اللهم ارحم موتانا وموتى المسلمين واشف مرضانا ومرضى المسلمين وانصر إخواننا المستضعفين المظلومين في مشارق الأرض وفي مغاربها ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار والحمد لله رب العالمين.